any time that I want to give away my money. So this is going to be a risky sermon. Of course, we can give lots of stuff, and that's the whole idea of the furniture project, that people give incredibly generously of their time and their energy, and give of their furniture, and give of their interest and their prayers and the concerns for other people. And we're not going to talk about any of that. That's all really, really important. But I want to talk about giving money. And I'll tell you why in a minute. So, for the African immigrants amongst us, I'd love to know what the attitude is like in the Congo about talking about money, because the British attitude is, we just don't talk about that sort of thing. So there's been lots and lots of stuff in the press the last week or two about politicians and their tax returns and where they get their money from and how much they earn and all the rest of it. And I read somebody saying it would be easier for a politician to talk about their affair that they were having than it would be to talk about their tax return and their money. British people you just don't talk about that sort of thing. So, but the Bible does, and Jesus does. So we need to. So if we could, Susan's going to read this out for us. It's Matthew chapter 6. And there's two bits that are all about money. It's verses 1 to 4. And then, what's the other bit? No, it's a bit before that. 19 to 24. So, why do I want to talk about money and not talk about the other stuff that we give? Giving of time, or giving of our energy, or giving of our emotions and relationships and all that sort of thing. Couple of different reasons. I think I've said this before, that Jesus' first priority, he spends more time talking about anything else, is the kingdom of God, or the kingdom of heaven, same thing. That's the majority of the largest single thing that he talks about. But his second priority, the thing that he talks about second most after talking about the kingdom of God, is money. It's not about relationships, it's not about church, it's not about prayer, it's not about sex, it's not about all the other stuff that churches tend to obsess about. He talks about money. And that's why there's several chunks in the Sermon on the Mount that are specifically about money. The next reason I want to talk about money, more rather than giving about anything else, is because it's not just Jesus' priority, it's the Bible's priority as well. Somebody has gone and counted about how many verses there are that talk about money or giving or about the poor and all that sort of thing. And there's something like 3,300 verses in the Bible. That's about one verse in every 10 or 12 verses. So one verse in 12 is about money. And that's a large, large chunk of the Bible. So if we are serious about following Jesus, if we're serious about applying the Bible to our lives, we have to have those priorities as well. Do we spend that much time thinking about, as a church, about how we spend our money? Do we spend that much time talking about it? Do we spend that much time taking those Bible verses and thinking, well, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for us as a church? No, we don't. We don't prioritize it anything like as much as we should. Third reason. Jesus says in the last verse that we read there that you cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and money. The old way of saying it was God and mammon. And there is nothing else that Jesus holds up like that as being a comparison. He doesn't say you cannot serve both God and, following football teams. He doesn't say that don't be tempted or swayed by sex or power or anything else, the way that he holds up money like that. There's nothing else that has such a dangerous hold on our lives as money. There is nothing else that he elevates to giving it a name like mammon. That's the sort of priority that Jesus gives it in terms of warning us about our lives and what we should be doing with it. And if you think about it, it's all around us in our everyday lives and the things that we say anyway. We say things like, put your money where your mouth is. Or, let's see the colour of your money. That we know in everyday life that that's the sort of power that money has. That if you want to find out where power is, we say, follow the money. That money is what drives every aspect of our lives, public lives, our private lives, our government's lives, everything. So even our secular, worldly, atheist society knows all of that. Martin Luther had a saying. He said that to become a Christian, you had to experience 3 conversions. You had to experience a conversion of the head, conversion of the heart, and the conversion of the pocketbook. And when he said pocketbook, he meant wallet or purse. Now, why did he say that? I mean, conversion of the head, well, that makes sense. You've got to understand it, you've got to read it, you've got to think about it, you've got to choose it. Conversion of the heart, well, that makes sense too. You've actually got to want it, you've got to feel it, you've got to choose and believe it. But as well as the importance of all of those normal things that we would see in becoming a Christian and being converted, he also said you have to be converted in your wallet, in your credit card. Because that's how powerful a part of our lives it is. That's the proof of whether we have actually been converted in our heads and our hearts, is what's happening in our purses and our wallets. So that's why I want to talk about money and not just generosity or giving in all of these other ways. Jesus just assumes that we're going to give. He starts off saying, when you give. He doesn't say if you're going to give, or I'm telling you, you really must give. He just assumes that we're going to give. That there's no debating it. And it's also fairly easy about, well, who you're going to give to. Because it says there, when you give to the needy. And he's always going on about when you're giving to the poor. And he also fully expects us to give to the church. That he upheld the money that was being given to the temple. Even though the priests and the temple were utterly corrupt, he still expected his disciples to give money to the temple. Now, that's all fairly easy. That's all dead straightforward. I'm sure we'd all agree with that. Yes, we should all give. That's part of the Christian life. Yes, we should all give to people who are in need. Yes, we should give to the poor. Yes, we should be giving to church. That's not difficult or debatable. How much do we give, though? And who exactly are the poor and needy? I know that I'm going to be told, Dad, I really need the new Star Wars DVD that comes out tomorrow. That I don't think... I don't think that's what Jesus meant when he said the needy. And when Jesus said to give to the poor, I don't think that when our children come to me and go, I'm really broke, Dad. I'm not sure that's quite what he meant about giving to the poor. So who are the poor? Who are the wealthy? Are we wealthy? Or are we the poor? And it all depends who you compare yourselves to. Everybody compared to Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, we're all broke compared to them. So compare ourselves to 1 billion people who are going to go to bed hungry tonight, probably don't even have a bed, and yeah, we're all incredibly wealthy. But what does the Bible say? Why does the Bible define it? What's the point of money? I mean, Jesus talks about money and the Bible talks about money, but what's the biblical purpose of money? Why has God given us money if it's all so dangerous? The biblical definition of who's wealthy and who's poor is actually incredibly shocking. It simply says that if you have enough for today, then you're fine. If you don't have enough to get through today, then you're poor. If you have more than enough to get through today, then you're wealthy. Simple as that. So that's why it goes on about storing up treasures for yourself. That if you have enough to store up and save stuff for tomorrow or the next day, then you're already wealthy. That's why Jesus says, don't worry about tomorrow, because tomorrow has enough worries for itself. That the measure that he uses is about, do you have enough for today? And the poor were the people who don't have enough to eat today, to get through today. And if you start thinking about it, actually that's not a bad way of defining things. There are plenty of places within a short walk from here where people aren't going to have enough to get through today. There was a report this week came out about food banks that there were well over 1 million emergency parcels given out by the Russell Trussell Trust. And they gave out 1.1 million parcels of 3-day supplies of food last year in our country. And that's just horrific. We are the 5th richest country in the earth. And we cannot even make sure that our own people are fed. They warned that our society is starting to accept this as normal. That all the supermarkets now have places to donate food to. You didn't see that 5 years ago. And that's now accepted as normal. That our own society, our own neighbours often don't have enough to get through today. And we're not just talking about immigrants, we're talking about people who have jobs, who don't have enough money to heat the house or to feed themselves or their families. And that's before we start thinking about Syrian refugees or sort of the places that are horrifically poor in this world. So if you think about it, actually that's a fairly good place to start about who we're going to decide who's poor. So what's the biblical purpose of money? Why does God give us money? And there's 2 reasons, really. The first one is fairly obvious. It's to protect us against some of the horrors of life, to protect us against illness, to protect us against tragedy. That if you have a bit of money set aside and somebody dies, then it's easier to cope, to get through. That if somebody gets sick, you immediately need money to be able to live, to be able to get treatment. And that's partly why God gives us money. It's a blessing to help for the times of trouble. The other main thing that the Bible talks about the purpose of money is to give it away. That the main reason that we're given wealth, by which we mean more than just today, is so that we can give it to somebody else, and the people who don't have enough. I've done an awful lot of reading and an awful lot of studying, because I hope to someday write all this up, about what's the difference between giving as a Christian, about if we're giving as a church, about the Christian life in giving, and what anybody else would regard as giving. If you went out and asked ordinary people on the street, do you give Christmas presents? Yes. Do you give to charity? Yes. Do you give nice things to your children? Yes. What's the difference between the Christian life and that sort of giving, and how can you tell the difference? And my theory is that you can sum it up in one word, and that's generosity. But what does generosity mean? Kathy asked me this when she was about 8 years old. I was doing stuff for Bible college. And she said, "What are you doing, Dad?" And I said, "I'm writing stuff about generosity." "What's generosity?" How do you explain generosity to an 8-year-old? We all know what it means. You know instinctively, well, this is a generous gift, or yes, generosity has to be part of the Christian life. Do we believe in a generous God? Yes, of course we do. Do we believe that we should be generous people? Yes, absolutely. Wouldn't we all love to have that word attached to our names, to be known as a generous person? Wouldn't that be amazing to have that on your gravestone? Here lies a generous person. I mean, it's one of these wonderful words that is untainted and that we would all aspire to. and instinctively think, yeah, that's right. But what does that actually mean? So I was trying to think, what's the most generous thing that anybody's ever done for me? What's the most generous thing that a gift anybody's given to me? And it was a bowl of chicken soup. About 25 years ago, I was on a student team that went to Bolivia. Bolivia is bang in the middle of Central America. And it was one of these student teams that goes away, and we were building a church hall, and it was partly an excuse for a holiday. It was partly an excuse to see somewhere nice and foreign. It was partly an excuse to actually get alongside the church and get to know them and to see another part of God's world, but also God's fellowship and God's people. And I spent 6 weeks there, and we had a great time. And one of the people who came along with the team was a chap who'd been a missionary. He was a pastor. He'd been a pastor in Argentina until the day that his wife gave birth to their third child, a son, who had Down syndrome. And he had awful health problems, really bad heart problems. And so they had to come home to the UK because they just couldn't cope with his health needs in Argentina. And so he became a pastor of a church in England and was serving faithfully there, but his heart was still in Latin America. And any excuse, any chance that he could get to go back out to Latin America and preach and teach and all the rest of it, he would jump on it. So he was attached to our team for a bit. And he was doing some preaching in Spanish to the local churches. And the church in the neighbouring village found out about this and decided that they wanted to have a midweek service and have him come along and preach to them. So we all went. Now, I've tried to find this place on Google Earth. I can't find it. The village that we were staying in, you can't find on Google Earth either because it was so small. It was really in the back of beyond, in the foothills of the Andes. And so one evening we had our dinner. It was getting dark, so we all went out with torches, and we went down this sort of dust trail for about 3/4 of an hour to the next village, and we were welcomed there by the church. And sort of half their village had turned out to the church for the meeting. And beforehand, they sat us all down. There was about 14 of us, and they served us up chicken soup. And that was a hugely generous, unwarranted gift that they didn't have to do. That it was a very poor place. That people often did go hungry because they just didn't have enough to eat. And you especially didn't kill the chickens, because the chickens give you eggs every day. So to kill a chicken was something that you did as a celebration. That was a huge party sort of thing. And to feed 14 people who just landed on your doorstep was a really big thing. I am convinced that somebody went hungry for a day or two for giving us that chicken soup. And the daft thing was, we didn't need any. We'd had our dinner. We'd already eaten. And of course we sat down, and it was actually really good soup, and we really enjoyed it. But we didn't need it. We didn't tell them that. We weren't so rude that we said, oh, no, thanks very much, actually I'm full. No, we sat down and we enjoyed our chicken soup, and we were very grateful for it, and we had the church service, and we went home again. And I'll need to explain that more about why on earth was that so generous. Because that story has all the different elements that I think makes the difference between a generous gift and an ordinary gift. First thing was that they weren't obliged to do it. Nobody forced them to give, nobody asked them to give, they just gave. They gave us chicken soup because they wanted to. And often the way that we give is because we have to. I pay my taxes because I have to. I'll end up in prison if I don't. I give Christmas presents to certain people because they give Christmas presents to me. I kind of feel obliged to. That's not generous giving. That's because you feel that you're forced to in some sort of way. You know what it's like that sometimes somebody's coming to the door and they're collecting for a charity, and you kind of feel, yes, I better put something in because you feel obliged to. That's the sort of giving that anybody would do. But that's not generous giving. Generous giving is because you don't have to. Nobody's forcing you. The next thing was that their giving wasn't asked for. They didn't wait. They didn't say, oh, all these people have turned up. Oh, better ask them if they want some dinner. They'd already decided well in advance they were going to give us dinner. They didn't stop to wait or think or whatever. They had already said, yes, we want to give. That we want to give them chicken soup. That they didn't wait until somebody went knocking on their door or asking for it. They couldn't help but give. Now what do I mean by that? Imagine we'd gone along and said, look, this is really good of you, but actually we've already eaten and we don't want to put you out and we know that this is going to cost you. They would have been more, it wouldn't have that they would have been offended, they wouldn't have understood that. They would have said, but what do you mean? We want to give you this. That it was almost against the grain for them not to give hospitality like that. That they couldn't help but give it. That if you said to them, sometimes people will turn up at other places and they wouldn't be given a bowl of soup. They would go, that what do you mean? That is such an alien concept. Do you see what I mean? That it was in their very nature that they couldn't help but be hospitable and give to somebody. Their giving was extravagant. That I've already explained that this was a huge deal. It wasn't just vegetable soup, it was chicken soup. Isn't that what Christian giving is supposed to be? Not just sort of 10 pence in the collection box when it comes around, or 10 pence in somebody shaking a jar on the street. Do we believe in a God who is extravagant? Oh yes, we do. God's giving is outrageously extravagant. So, isn't that the sort of giving that we should be giving? Isn't that the sort of thing that we mean by a generous gift? Like, whoa, you're giving me that? That's what generous giving is, isn't it? Generous giving costs. If Bill Gates happened to phone me up and go, Jurgen, I want to give you a Ferrari. I'd go, oh, thanks very much, Bill. Wouldn't actually cost him very much, would it? He wouldn't even notice. If anybody in this room phoned me up and said, Jurgen, I want to give you a Ferrari, I would be blown away. Because I would know instinctively, without knowing your circumstances, without knowing what your income is, without knowing what your savings are, that is a hugely, hugely generous gift. Because I know that it's costing you something. Do we believe in a God who gives sacrificially? Do we believe in a Christian life that costs to give? Yeah, we do. When was the last time that you or I gave anything that cost us? It's easier to give something if it doesn't really matter, if it's something that we don't need, if it's something that we're not going to notice that's gone. But if we're actually giving up something, well, that's different. That's real generosity. Next thing is, it wasn't just giving to no end. They weren't just giving sort of, there you go, thank you very much, bye. They were giving as part of a relationship. That Christian giving isn't just about the stuff that you're giving. That it is given in relationship. We don't just dish out furniture to anybody who needs it. We do that, but we don't just do that. That what the important part in many ways is that it's about the relationship that the church and the furniture project has with the people who are coming in. That we give furniture and help because we care about these people and we want to see them again, and because we welcome along to the Christmas party, and because they're welcome to come back any other week, because of the relationship that we have with them. If you pass somebody in the street who's jangling a jar and you stick money in it, there's no relationship there, is there? You're giving. You might give generously. You might give a lot, but there's no relationship with who you're giving to. That truly generous giving, you're giving with a relationship in mind. I'd like to think that those folk in Bolivia would have done that to anybody that trundled along, not just some white gringos from the other side of the world, and so we were special in some way. I'd love to think that they would have treated any strangers or any visitors like that. I'd also love to think that the reason that they did it was because we were fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. That it was that relationship that mattered to them. That we weren't just guests, that we weren't just visitors or aliens, but that we were brothers and sisters. That relationship should be why we give. Why do we give money in church? Because of our relationship with God. We give because God has given us so much. Last thing. I think generous giving doesn't expect anything back. That, again, like Christmas, you give Christmas presents thinking, hey, if I give them something, I know I'll get something back, because Granny's loaded. That they gave us chicken soup, not expecting anything back. We didn't have anything to give them back anyway, but that wasn't why they were giving us things. You sometimes see charities saying, if you give us so much money, we'll give you this free gift. Or that sometimes there's an expectation that you'll receive something back. I helped out my next door neighbour and I gave them this, that and the other, and they've never done anything for me. But that's not Christian giving. That's not generous giving. Generous giving gives freely. No strings attached, no other agenda, nothing else. And that's the way the furniture is given in the furniture project. That we don't ask people for donations, we don't ask people for money or time or anything like that. If we never see them again, well, that's okay. We'd rather see them again, but we don't ask or demand them. There are some charities, some Christian charities, that expect you to sign up, that you will come along to so many meetings and we will give you charity or aid. And that's wrong. That's not the way the Bible works. That's not the way Jesus worked. Jesus healed people who came to him. He didn't ask them to sit down and listen to a sermon first or sign up to anything first. He just gave freely. Our giving should be with no strings attached and no other agenda. If you've been listening carefully, you may think, all this giving generously, about giving freely and sacrificially, about giving in relationship, about not being able to help but giving, about it being unasked for but giving anyway. That sounds like grace to me. And it is. That's what grace is. Generous giving is grace made real. It is grace made manifest. It is grace in the real world. It is real life grace. It is practical grace. Think about the examples that are given to us in the Bible about giving and giving generously. Teenagers, we've talked all about the prodigal son and the father. And the father of the prodigal son coming home is a wonderful, wonderful example of generous giving. That he doesn't have demands of his prodigal son whenever he comes back. He doesn't say, right, you can earn your way back. He doesn't say, you've got to do X, Y, and Z. He doesn't wait. He goes running down the road for his son. His giving is outrageous. The elder son's absolutely outraged. You're doing what for my horrible prodigal brother? You're killing the fatted calf. You're giving him the best cloak. That's generous giving. Think about the widow's mite, the story about the poor widow who comes to the temple to give. And this is the example that Jesus holds up for us. That Jesus and his disciples are watching everybody come into the temple and put all their money in, and often it's with a song and dance, like Jesus talks about in the, look at me, look how much I'm giving, aren't I wonderful? And this poor widow comes in with her 2.5p, or whatever it is, and Jesus says, see her, she's given more than everybody else, because she has given all that she has. Her giving was sacrificial. That really cost, because he said that he'd given everything that she had. Where's the relationship in that? Why was she giving? She was putting money into the collection box. The relationship was with God there, that she was giving because she wanted to give to God, even though that the money was going to go into the parties that the priests had and into their lavish lifestyles and all that sort of thing. That wasn't the issue for her. The issue for her was that she was giving to God. That if you had said to that poor widow, you don't have to do this, you can't keep this money for yourself, that wouldn't compute for her. That wouldn't make sense. She couldn't help but give. She had to give that money because it was in her nature. That's generous giving. And then there's the final, greatest example of generous giving in the Bible. And we all know it. It's the cross. We sing about it. We have it at the front of our church every week. The cross was unasked for. It was given to us before we realized that we needed it. It's the most extravagant, outrageous, generous gift that could ever be given. That God and Jesus wasn't obliged to die for us, wasn't forced to, didn't have to, but he chose to. That God didn't wait for us to go, actually, we know we're in a mess. The Bible talks about Jesus as the Lamb who was slain before the creation of the world. That God couldn't help but give to us on the cross. You might think I've got off the subject of money. And I guess I have, because I've talked about giving. And all the sort of giving I've talked about could be anything. From Jesus dying on the cross to a bowl of chicken soup. But I said I wanted to talk about money, because that's what the Bible talks about. And that's what Jesus talks about. And so, your homework, if you'll accept it, is to go away and think about your giving and your money. And that's a private thing. It's none of my business. Nobody else's business. That's what Jesus says, that the left hand doesn't have to know what the right hand's doing. It is solely between you and God. But I'd like you to have a think. If we wrote down everything that you spend your money on over the next month or the last month, if we looked at your bank account and all the different lines in the bank account, what would it say about you? What would it say about me? What does it say about where our priorities are? Would somebody just looking at your bank account be able to tell that you're a Christian? Would they be able to say, there's a generous person? It's between all of us and God, that one. Jesus doesn't put a limit. He doesn't say, 10%, that'll do. He doesn't say 20%. He doesn't say 50%. He doesn't put, this is how much you have to give. He just expects us to give generously. And even if you've given in the past, what about now? Nobody's going to come checking. Nobody's going to come asking. Nobody's going to say, right, feedback next week. Let's open up all the bank accounts like we've asked the politicians to do. Let's have some accountability in the church and see where we're all giving our money to. It's between you and God. And whether that's a salary or whether that's a pension or whether it's benefits or whether it's pocket money, it's still all our money that we all have. And it's between us and God about what we do with it. And I know that what I've just said is one of the toughest, hardest things that any of us could possibly do. Which is why Martin Luther says it has to be a conversion of the head and the heart and the wallet and the purse. So let's pray. Father, you know that we love you. You know that we're trying our best. You know that sometimes those things aren't even true. That we sort of just trundle along. Well, we'd like to think we're doing our best, but to be honest, we're not really. Father, we know that it's very easy to be comfortable. It's very easy just to stay where we're at and to accept the good things that you've given us and the blessings that you've given us. You know that each of us has given in the past, and sometimes we've even given when it's cost us. But this is a new day, and you have given us more blessings. So help us to know what to do with that. Help us not to be selfish. Help us not to be show-offish. Help us to be wise about how we give of our money, about who and when and what you would have us do with it. Help us to be honest with ourselves, to take a cold, hard look at ourselves in the mirror about the sort of person that we really are underneath when we think about money, or when we are counting up how much we have or what we're going to do with it. And help us, although it's hard to say, help us to be more like you in what we do with all of that. Father, I'm afraid about what you might ask me to do with all of that. I'm afraid about the difficult stuff that you might ask of me with that. The awkward questions, the sacrifice or the costs. So help me to trust that you are my Father, that you love us more than we can possibly know, that you look out for us and want the very best for us. And that includes sometimes when we have to give things up. And for our church, Lord, wouldn't it be wonderful if we were known as a generous church, as a generous people? Help us as a body, as a fellowship, to know what we should do with the monies that come in. Help us to be wise, but to be generous as well about how to steward and how to use those monies. And Father, thank you that you have given all of us more than just for today.